Fighting is intensifying in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. The Rwanda-backed M23 group is making further territorial advances. So, with diplomacy failing, what are the risks the conflict may escalate into another regional war? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, anxiety is growing in the capital Kinshasa. Rwandan-backed M23 rebels are advancing in the east, spreading out across North and South Kivu, and are now aiming for the city of Uvira. This is happening at such a rapid pace that it's stirring up memories of events of 3 decades ago. Many regional players are involved, including Uganda, Burundi and South Africa. And that's causing concern the conflict could spread beyond the DRC. Can M23 rebels push all the way to Kinshasa? More on this in today's programme, which we begin with this report from Dmitry Medvedenko.
Uvira, batu bote banakimbia.
In Uvira, everyone is running away, says the man filming this video as gunfire is heard. Local militia fighters urge people not to panic as Congolese army troops retreat from the area. Rwandan-backed M23 rebels are advancing on this town by Lake Tanganyika that borders Burundi, about 80 kilometers south of Bukavu. The rebels took control of Goma in January and then Bukavu in southern Kivu weeks later. The pace at which M23 has been advancing has alarmed people in the capital Kinshasa, 1,500 kilometers away.
The
government must take its responsibilities, review how the army functions, and restore the chain of command. For example, the town of Bunagana was taken without any effort, as was Minova.
I call on the head of state not to negotiate. We must fight against them. If someone hits you, what should you do? You must fight back.
The UN says the war has forced hundreds of thousands of people from their homes. South Africa has been sending additional troops to join the Congolese army in fighting M23 after 14 of its soldiers were reported to have been killed last month. The presence of Burundi forces on the ground is fanning fears the fighting in Congo could expand into a larger regional conflict.
The commitment to a political solution is one that is unwavering, first of all for the DRC, but also for all countries of the region, as well as for the Security Council. So I think it is an important takeaway to say that everyone is committed to a political solution. The fighting must end, and for that the Rwandan troops must withdraw.
The Democratic Republic of Congo and the United Nations say Rwanda supports the M23 rebels with arms and troops. The Congolese government also says Kigali is using the group as a proxy army to capture the country's resources in the east worth trillions of dollars. Dmitry Medvedenko, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss all of this now with our panel of guests today. And in Accra, in Ghana, we have Kambale Musavuli, a researcher at the Centre for Research on the Congo. In Uppsala, Sweden, Angela Muvumba Sellström, she's a senior researcher at the Nordic African Institute. And in Washington, D.C., Abdullahi Halakhe is a peace and policy analyst and senior advocate at Refugees International. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today. Angela, let me start with you. Are you surprised by what we've seen this year? Are you surprised by M23's progress?
I'm not surprised, actually. I mean, M23 has grown in stature and in scale and size in the last 5 years or so. The negotiations that were ongoing and led by Angola in December of 2024 broke down. And that was partly because there was a sort of a dispute between the government of the DRC and other actors involved in the process about the inclusion of M23 in negotiations. The result of the last months are also partly a reflection of changes in the geopolitical landscape. And I think for M23 and for other actors, it's evident geopolitically that there is an opportunity now to actually go on in terms of military goals and objectives and move quite rapidly towards crossing certain boundaries that have existed in the past when external actors would have been much more reluctant to allow or to permit encroachment on territorial sovereignty of a state.
Kambale, let me bring up one of the absolute central issues, if I may, which is the involvement of Rwanda. Rwanda says it's not backing the M23. Everyone from President Paul Kagame down is saying that. What is the reality? Because I don't think there's anyone in the international community who now believes that.
I believe for President Paul Kagame, he actually stated that he doesn't know if his troops are in the DRC or not. And for everyone, the evidence is already presented. We have drone surveillance, video evidence, photographic evidence, and people on the ground who have confirmed this. So it's no longer an allegation. It is clear that thousands of Rwandan troops from the Rwanda Defense Forces are in the DRC.
Okay, well, let me interrupt you there, if I can, Kambale. Do we have estimates of the numbers? How many Rwandan troops do we think are there? How many M23 fighters do we think they are backing, just to be clear?
The UN group of experts has quoted that since last year, at least 4,000 Rwanda Defense Force soldiers are on Congolese soil, and they submitted this evidence to the UN Security Council. What we have seen so far, there has not been strong actions up until yesterday. Yesterday, the U.S. Secretary of Treasury, or the Treasury Office in the United States, put sanction on a former Rwandan general, who is currently the Minister of State for Regional Cooperation, James Kabarebe, and his name is part of the Rwanda Defense Force soldiers, retired and active, who have been listed in the UN Group of Experts report as the commanders or the liaison within the Rwandan army to the M23. So seeing that action is a path in the right direction. But as you read it, at least for Congolese, we are saying that the statement is still doesn't still sit well with Congolese, because in it says that James Kabarebe has been active for the past 30 years, 3 decades. This tells us that the United States government has all the information that it needs or required to actually take action. But for 30 years, they have not taken action. And I hope this step in the right direction is a path to justice.
So action in terms of some sanctions from the US, but the Security Council, Abdullahi, which was meeting on Wednesday, the UN Security Council, has not taken action. It's certainly discussed this quite a few times. In that meeting, the most recent meeting on Wednesday, the UN Secretary General's envoy for the Great Lakes, Huang Xie, said the risk of a regional conflagration is more real than ever. History is repeating itself. I think it might be useful for you to just explain the history of the 1990s for us and what's at stake.
I think what at stake is the regional stability of the Great Lakes region. This is not the first time the Rwandese are intervening in the territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Towards the end of the Cold War, when the former president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, formerly known as Zaire, was overthrown through a combination of Ugandans and Rwandans, and James Kabarebe played a significant role in that. After that, when Rwandese and Ugandans, but especially Rwandese, thought that they have installed their man in the form of Kabila Senior, he turned against them, or at the very minimum, the Rwandese saw them being marginalized, and therefore they launched another military attack to overthrow him in 1998, I think in August. But that brought in so many African militaries in what was defined then as Africa's World War, where by some estimate, almost 5.4 million people died. I think we've not resolved some of those tight knots that really led to that conflict, where Rwanda or at the very minimum considers that it faces an existential threat from the government that was in power that was deposed in 1994, that is inside the eastern part of the DRC, and the question of the Rwandese, or at the very minimum, the Tutsis called Banyamulenge that occupy the regional eastern part of the DRC.
Okay, I want to interrupt you there because I want Angela to take up the story. Since then, and I think throughout history, the eastern part of DRC has had very weak control from the capital, Kinshasa, that's more than 1,000 kilometres away, and it's been a conflict zone ever since, hasn't it?
That's right. It's been a conflict zone ever since, and I mean, even just for the ostensible period that we're discussing, I mean, it's been impossible for Kinshasa, through successive governments and elections, to have full territorial control over that region. Nonetheless, I think that the population in eastern DRC has been kind of like a football being kicked back and forth between externally supported armed groups like M23, and there's Allied Defense Forces, the ADF, backing by different regional actors. But that's also resulted in mass displacement. Over 1.5 million people have been displaced regularly, and large scale of human rights violence, including sexual violence. The combination of this and the fact that the Kinshasa government hasn't been able to also implement strong governance institutions in eastern DRC has further left the population sort of prey to the predation of external actors, of external armed groups. And as well as, of course, the number, I mean, the over 100 militias and rebel groups and civil defense units, and it's a highly militarized area. I would argue that it is likely that the situation will worsen, but I don't really think it's going to become World War III for Africa again. I don't think we'll see a complete repeat. I think we'll see something different than we saw in the 1990s and the late 1990s.
Okay.
I think.
Let me bring in Kambale. If we look at M23, they have been around for some time, and they did take Goma once before in 2012, only for a short period. And then there was a special enforcement wing of the UN force, MONUSCO, called the Force Intervention Brigade, deployed with an offensive mandate, and they were pushed down and pushed back into Rwanda. It's so different this time, isn't it? Because, I mean, my list here, tell me if I've left anyone out, the forces that were in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, you had MONUSCO, the UN peacekeeping force, on paper 11,000 strong, although they weren't in South Kivu, which is where M23 have now gone. You've got the Congolese armed forces. You had mercenaries reportedly from Romania and France that had been hired by the Congolese. You had another peacekeeping force from the South African Development Community. That's the regional grouping that was called SAMI DRC. There were Malawian and particularly South African troops there, and 14 South Africans died. And you had troops from the neighbouring country, Burundi, more than 10,000 soldiers there from Burundi. And M23 has ploughed ahead, have they not, and Kambale, and succeeded despite all of those different forces?
For all intents and purposes, the M23 is the Rwanda Defense Forces. I mean, when you read the UN report, it's quite clear about what is happening. We are fighting a superb military that's able to jam GPS system. What does that mean? It means that the Congolese army cannot fly their planes in the area where the rebels are. Who has this technology? The Rwandan military. We have a SHORAD system, right? The short air defense system used by the M23. You have night vision goggle. According to Africa Intelligence newspaper, they've actually mentioned that the taking over of the city of Goma was done with support of assault drones. Even Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, in an interview with France 24, stated that the M23 have much more sophisticated weaponry than even the UN forces. So it's the context to look at what is actually happening there. Now, as you talk about the different armies involved, they've come with different mandates. The Force Intervention Brigade that came in 2012 was actually an action of SADC, where the UN did not want this force to be outside of the UN jurisdiction. That's how they were actually added. So what we've seen over the years is that SADC nations have supported a path to peace from a military perspective to bring about that. But I'm also clear that the path to peace is not going to come through military means, right? It's going to come through diplomacy. In 2012, what stopped the M23 was aggressive diplomacy. Now, what are we talking about? Western nations and international institutions such as the World Bank, the African Development Bank, all withheld aid to Rwanda. That single action caused the diplomatic pressure internationally for reining in Rwanda. Right now, that type of action has not reached. We strongly believe, because of Rwanda's economy, because of Rwanda's military support from the Western nations, that it's essential for them to take similar actions to rein in Rwanda, to be able to go back to the negotiating table to discuss about peace and stability. But a military solution will not end the conflict. It's diplomatic.
Okay, let me bring in Angela on that point. I mean, is there anything militarily that can stop M23? One of the things I noticed when they took Bukavu, they also took Kavumu, which is apparently a big airport, which cuts off all of the supplies to the Congolese army.
That's right. I mean, I would just have to agree with the others that I think that it is a question of really being able to militarily engage and disarm, not just necessarily disarm, but neutralize Rwanda, persuade and create incentives for the Rwandan government to in turn contain and control M23. I think that diplomatically there are a lot of weaknesses in such an effort. Burundi has withdrawn some of its forces. I don't know if the reports from this week are true or not. They've withdrawn, I believe, 10,000 of those forces. Uganda, on the other hand, is deploying a bit more. I think there's still quite a lot of uncertainty and back and forth. And the region, I believe, would like to have a sort of status quo settlement. But I think that the real pressure has to come from even further outside of the continent. It will have to come from U.S. Further strengthening its negative message against Kigali, to contain Kigali and to persuade Kigali to control M23. And really, that is really the lever that needs to be pressed in order for all of these actors to go back. I mean, there was some consensus between the East African community and the Southern African Development Community around the diplomatic process to go proceeding. I think that consensus could hold, but I do believe that there are major concessions that Kinshasa will have to make, and that ultimately there will have to be some sort of a negotiation that really takes into account the interests of Rwanda, the interests of M23, the territorial integrity of the Congolese people and of the government in Kinshasa. But that will be diplomatic and a political process. But without strong leverage against Rwanda, we will not get there.
Abdullahi, in terms of the M23 and where they are moving, they seem to be moving south, Uvira, and that is right on the border with Burundi, on the shore of Lake Tanganyika, less than 30 kilometres away from Bujumbura, which is the main city and used to be the capital. I mean, we're involving more and more countries. We'll come on to Uganda in a minute, but more and more countries. I mean, they already had troops there, Burundi, but more and more countries are getting directly involved. Refugees are streaming into Burundi.
Yes, it is. I think even while we are discussing the large strategic issues at play, what we shouldn't lose sight of is the people who are paying the ultimate price are the Congolese, the children and women in the DRC. Last year, I was in Goma. I met women, like not a single one of them who has not experienced, sexual and gender-based violence. And some of them told me the people who committed these are people who are as young as my children. So I think we shouldn't lose sight of that. But I think to your question around Burundi, it's the fact that Burundi and Rwanda doesn't enjoy good relationship because there is a rebel group that is based inside Burundi, inside the DRC, that the Burundians think are being supported or allege they are being supported by Rwanda to destabilize Burundi. So therefore, they are not just the interests of the DRC, there are other moving interests of other countries that are using the DRC as a base from where they destabilize not just the DRC, but countries in the region. But fundamentally, though, we have to get back to the question of what is in the interest of DRC. Everybody has their own interest. But DRC also has its own interest. And I think fundamentally, the citizens of DRC who've continued to endure egregious human rights violation, women and children being raped consistently as a tool of war by various actors, including allied militias that work with the DRC government. That has to stop. It doesn't matter how insecure Rwanda feels, but I think the people of the DRC, especially in the East, deserve much more than it is getting right now.
Kambale, earlier Angela mentioned briefly Ugandan forces, because we've got Burundi now, and then Uganda. They've gone to the capital of Ituri province, Bunia. Do we think, because in the past they have been allied with Rwanda, but they've also recently been in support of the DRC, do we know exactly what Uganda is doing there?
I'm sorry to keep referencing the UN group of experts, because they've been very clear and sharing the evidence. Right now, the M23 have been training in Kampala, according to the UN group of experts. Not only that they've been entering the DRC from the Ugandan border.
So you are suggesting that Uganda is on the side of Rwanda and the M23, just to put it simply. Is that your understanding?
Yes, but it's not me. It's the UN group of experts presenting that to us at the Security Council, right? It's not an opinion from myself. It's the facts on the ground, right? So we do know that UPDF commanders, that's the Ugandan People's Defense Force, the military, have been instructors in the camps where the M23 is training. We also know that M23 crosses the border of Uganda to DRC without being stopped by Ugandan government, military, or border patrol, or whatever they may have. And a recommendation from the UN group of experts is that the Ugandan government needs to take action around the evidence that's been presented to them, which they have not. So I will not be surprised to see another front actually create on the top. But I think it's important to point out with the last intervention about the interest of the Congolese. The interest of the Congolese lies into Patrice Lumumba's Independence Day speech, where he says that Congo's minerals, Congo's land, Congo's resources should belong to the Congolese people. It should be exploited for the benefit of the people. What we are seeing is not that, right? As we are talking about the killing, the interests of foreign nations around what they need in the country, mineral resources needed for the fourth industrial revolutions continue to come out of the Congo. Congo's coltan is being exported. Congo's lithium is also being exported, gold, and so on, right? So we must know, as we even talk about the complexity of the conflict, that in the real root cause is control of Congo's mineral wealth. And he has appeared over Congo's history in multiple forms. So to address that is for nations who are consuming these minerals to hold corporations accountable. That's why seeing the sanctions around James Kabarebe, where he pointed out very clearly, right? This Rwandan defense minister is facilitating the export of minerals from DRC to the outside world. No speculation. So this is why we are sanctioning him, putting the names of the companies, right? The Kingston Holding registered in Paris, I believe, and also in the UK, that it shouldn't be presented as a mysterious conflict where we do not know the actors, we do not know the companies. Africans are wantonly killing each other. That
Okay.
we need to talk with the people involved.
Angela, I was interested to read that some embassies in Kinshasa, Western embassies, including the US and the UK, have evacuated most of their staff because they're worried about the situation. I mean, do you think there is any possibility M23 may want to push all the way to the capital? And just a quick point of geography, that's over 1,500 kilometres away. But of course, there is the precedent of 1997, isn't there?
Yes, that's true. But it was a different time. I mean, the government in the DRC government was significantly weaker, I think, and had less experience with waging a kind of dance with Rwanda, with Kigali at that time. In this regard, I think that that I'm very skeptical that M23 will go all the way to Kinshasa. I don't think it needs to go all the way to Kinshasa. I mean, I think it needs to threaten to. I think that the threat of its military success and its control of eastern DRC and its success so far and its support from regional players really will create a kind of another lever, a negotiating position with Kinshasa. I do believe that the real ambition here is to have control of Congo's rare minerals, particularly from that part of the region. I know that M23, just alone in taxes, I think, paid to it for extraction of some critical minerals makes almost $1 million a month or more, just from that, not from the actual costs of actual profits. It's a kind of enslavement of the people of the Congo to production of and extraction of these minerals and to the global sort of financial system that supports it. The extraction. But I don't believe that M23 can actually go all the way to Kinshasa. We'll see, though. I mean, if the US doesn't really engage, if there's not enough international pressure, I think between now and the next few months, then perhaps I would change my mind. But simply by putting more pressure, like they did, I think, in 2012, there's a similar situation occurred, and there was significant pressure from the U.S. and that pulled back M23 occupation of Goma then. So I'm a bit more skeptical.
Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you to all our guests today, Kambale, Musavuli, Angela, Muvumba, Sellström and Abdullahi Halakhe. Thanks so much for watching. Remember, you can always see this programme again and all our recent editions by visiting the Inside Story page at aljazeera.com. We're on Facebook if you'd like to post your comments, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or if you prefer to use X, look for @AJ Inside Story. From me, James Bays, and all the production team, please stay safe and well. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.